السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to our second episode, and this is called In Context. And today we want to put in context a current event that's been discussed or has been shown in the media, that Israel wants to retaliate against Iran for launching missiles. So right on the bat, I want to ask Ihab, what are your thoughts in context? Can you put this into context? Why now, especially with what's happening in Gaza, in Yemen, Lebanon? Why would they want to retaliate against Iran?
What I'm going to try to address is not the event itself, meaning what are the calculations that are driving Iran's position regarding Israel. What I'd like to address is the broader question of what kind of a place is Iran trying to hold in the international order, and what kind of a place does it actually hold currently? Because that's the context in which you can understand the relationships with the US, the relationships with the countries around them, and the relationship with Israel. So I think that's the context in which we can start to understand.
And you're referring to Iran post 1999, meaning post the Iranian Revolution.
Yeah, 1979, you mean? Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's what I mean, yes.
Yes, we're obviously not referring to the Shah's Iran. My contention is that Iran, although it represents itself as a revolutionary order, is actually a regular nation state that is trying to find a place for itself within the existing international colonial order. Now, it uses tools that make use of its revolutionary postures, but in the final analysis, it's a regular nation state. Its fundamental problem with the order is that the organizing force of this order, the dominant state in international affairs, the US, would prefer to keep Iran as a pariah state, an outsider. International relations of Iran since the revolution has been to try to legitimize its existence within this state order, not outside it.
Actually, the view that people have is that Iran is actually standing up, for what's happening in Palestine and Lebanon. They're driven by their belief, whether it's Shiism or so forth. So, some would say, no, it's not trying to be within the order. It's actually contradict the order that's in place and has its own mission and goal to promote its beliefs and ideas.
Iran presents itself as an Islamic revolutionary force. So the question now, is it really trying to create an Islamic order? I don't think so, because it has been obviously carrying a sectarian axe, just like the states that are trying to create a counter axe and calling it a Sunni axe. Well, there is nothing called a Sunni idea or Sunni ideology or Sunni vision, and obviously King Abdullah Jr. of Jordan is not about anything that has to do with any ideology except for being English. Now, about Iran and whether it's trying to be a nation state or a regular nation state or not, well, you can see how Iran relates to the US. The international order is a colonial order. The dominant power of this order is the US. Iran has been seeking an understanding with the US all along. So even back in 1988, when they ended the war with Saddam, it was about finding an understanding with the US. When the US launched its first Gulf War, they were trying to seek an understanding with the US, so they got out of the way of the US. When the US established a colonial mini-state in northern Iraq, they tried to coexist with that new state. When the US decided to establish a new colonial order and go back to the 1920s after Bush Jr. took over in 2001, they tried to coexist with it and to present services to it in Afghanistan and Iraq. The order was willing to grant them that because it found that they can provide useful services for it to enter Iraq. And the same thing, something similar is now happening in Syria. Stabilize the existing Bashar order in the absence of better alternatives. So the existing colonial order is willing to do business with Iran. On the other hand, it wants to keep it as a pariah state because that's useful for the US to maintain a colonial existence in the region as the protector from the bad, ugly monster, Shia, crescent, whatever.
Okay, thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity for us to engage in this very important topic. I think I see things somewhat different than you on a lot of levels regarding this topic. Regarding the first question, does Iran want to be a normal state? I think at some levels yes, and at some levels no. I think Iran wants to enjoy the benefits of international trade, selling oil, being on the international market, but they know that to do that, they will have to play by a certain set of international norms that include certain rights and protections domestically that it doesn't afford its population. So there is a scholar who I'm not a big fan of. His name is Karim Sajjadpour, who's sort of an anti-regime scholar. And unlike most of the anti-Iranian regime scholars, he does actually have some sense in his analysis, because a lot of these guys are just totally crazy. He makes the point that Iran, in many ways, wants to have its cake and eat it too, in the sense that it wants to have the benefits of international trade, but it still wants to run its system the way it wants to. And a major part of the revolutionary ideology includes certain mandatory hijab rules and things like committees and multa'awin, or whatever you call them in Iran, the Garth Ishad. And this is something that puts it automatically sort of in a difficult position. It wants to be treated like other international actors, but it doesn't want to have to play by the rules that other international actors who are subject to, when you do dealings with the United States, when you do dealings with sort of the Western European countries, there's certain human rights rules and other policies that states have to sort of abide by. So in that regard, I think Iran it wants to be a normal state, but it doesn't want to have to sacrifice its autonomy to be able to do that. In addition, I think Iran sort of was founded on a very specific sort of revolutionary principle, and that it sort of is one of these states that needs an enemy in order to be able to survive. And I sort of think both sides benefit from having each other sort of as a boogeyman. I think it's a part of the rally around the flag effect that both states enjoy. I think Iran, just like every other nation state, is interested in spreading its national interest, and it more effectively secures its national interest in its regional hegemony by using Shiism to sort of control territories, to control political actors, and to sell oil and to do trade. And, connecting that the Shia crescent, if you want to call it, isn't about, any particular religious convictions. Because let's be honest, most Iranians recognize the Syrian Assad regime as apostates as well.
Correct.
Most Shia do not accept whatever it is Assad and his people are following these days. But nonetheless, it's a marriage made out of convenience, And in order for Iran to reach the Mediterranean, to be able to ship stuff and to get stuff, they need to be able to control the territories through Iraq, through Syria, and through Lebanon. So I think that this is Iran's way of maintaining its national interest in its regional hegemony. Most of their actions have thus far been performative, they've been theatrical, and they've resulted in very little actual damage. Now, there's a reason for that. They have shown that they do have pretty accurate military technology. So by them not killing people, that shouldn't be construed as a sign of weakness and incompetence. People, Zionist media say things like, oh, look how ineffective their missiles are. No, they're showing how effective their missiles are. They're showing that they can launch 200 missiles and not kill anybody. That's pretty hard to do. Think about that. So we see that Iran has been able to show that they do have some pretty serious weapons, that if they want, they can cause mass destruction casualties, but they're holding back on that. And I think they're hoping they don't have to go all in, because if they do, they're not in a good position because of the significantly more advanced military technology that Israel and the United States possess. So Iran has sort of boxed itself in a corner where it sort of has to respond to these attacks because, countless of their high-level generals have been killed now. Hezbollah has been, the entire leadership has been basically liquidated.
Yeah. So, but you said that Iran wants to keep its autonomy, right? Which I think America doesn't mind them keeping their autonomy and their certain parts of their culture or taste or whatever you want to call it, right? What the things they eat and so forth. But where do you see that you're different with Ihab, where they want to go out of the nation state, right? Where they actually they're like what you're saying is kind of concurring with what Ihab is saying for the most part, that they want to have their autonomy. They follow the international norms. They do what they need to do. They don't want to go outside of that norm. They want to be accepted and validated. So where is the key difference that you're saying where Ihab, the other one Ihab is saying? Because I think you're saying the same thing, but in a more elaborate manner.
I think that Iran is concerned. Like, here's the thing: free trade and genuine free trade and open, like the kind of EU interaction trade, that has a very that impacts your local domestic culture, right? So if there's too much freedom in trade and autonomy in Iran, they start to lose their hold on power domestically. When Iranian kids start listening to American music, right? They start becoming more Americanized. So you want to let in some trade, but if you let it get out of control, you start to lose your population. You see what I'm saying? So you want to get some benefits of trade, but you don't want to have a situation where your kids are speaking English now and they're watching American movies and they're not learning their Persian poetry anymore.
Actually, there is an assumption in Western literature that being part of the international order means copying Western modes of behavior. That is not necessary. So China is part of the international order, and it's part of the international order within its own rules, meaning people can engage with the international order, or states can engage with the international order within their own modes. Now, to the Western mind, they are not part of the West, and they are not accepted, and they are not correct. But that is, I'm not debating this point, because that is actually cultural colonialism, which is even beyond political colonialism or military colonialism. So it's I grant you that, yes, Iran, when it talks about engaging with the international order and being part of the international order, does not mean that they want, for example, to copy literally Western styles of clothes, for example. Make the point clear: the difference between being part of the international order and rejecting to be part of the international order is the difference between China before 1970 and China after 1970. That's what I mean by being part or not being part. I don't mean being part of the Western mores and cultures.
I think if Iran would not be so seen as threatening to Israel, they would probably be treated a lot differently. But Iran has made its entire international foreign policy basically to eliminate the state of Israel. So, like, that is basically how people understand Iran, whether that's true or not. And again, I don't know if I believe that's even true, because I think, again, Iran needs Israel to be its eternal bad guy to help keep national cohesion. But I do believe Iran likes the idea of keeping Israel under threat, having their militias surrounding them and, keeping them on their toes. And that game was played for quite a while, and Iran was willing to sort of sacrifice being basically a global pariah in order to meet this end. But, with what's happened lately, with Israel demonstrating pretty serious military superiority over their immediate neighbors, Iran is going to probably have to rethink their equation. This is why you've seen, I think, Pezeshkian go out and try to court Arab leaders to agree to longer-term détentes. And you're going to start seeing more effort. Even when he first came to power, the first thing he started doing was talk about restarting the nuclear negotiations, right? So, indeed, that's a sign that Iran does want. And think about it. Why did Khamenei let him run? He could have just not let him run for office. Iran's system, but they let a reformer run who was articulate and competent, who won. And nobody tried to stop him. They were cool with him winning. They wanted him to win because I think they wanted to try to change the foreign policy direction.
Okay. I think if you look at the larger context, you can capture events more clearly. So looking at the US, which is the organizing force of the international order, and how it relates to Iran and how Iran relates to it, would help us consolidate these concepts. So Iran was willing to go into negotiations with the US and Europe on its nuclear weapons program, and was willing to take serious steps to actually remove it. The US was also willing to pay the political price to enforce a deal against Israeli objections. Israel objects because it has its own interests in the Middle East, and Iran exists, and the fact that Iran exists means it has to have its own space, and Israel wants that space. But vice versa is also correct about Iran. So that's a source of friction. On the other hand, to the US, it's above this fray. It wants to maintain the order as an order, and it wants everyone to have their own place. So that's why it was willing to give Iran a place. But the interesting point to realize is, so when Trump came, he scrapped the deal. And then Iran went back to the program. The more interesting piece to notice is Biden, who was part of the administration that paid the political price to enforce the deal, came over and he agreed to scrapping the deal. He did not say so publicly, but that's his policy. What does that tell us? When Trump scrapped the deal, it wasn't because of the foolish concept of the Zionist agenda controlling the US. It was because there is a strong stream in US foreign policy that thinks that Iran as a pariah state is more useful than Iran as a regular state. And they would like to maintain that status because they think it's more useful. And Biden, by the time he came back, decided that whatever they want to try to do in 2015, it was by now outdated. And maintaining Iran in a pariah state, at least for the foreseeable future, is more preferable. So that's why he didn't go back to the deal. Now, it isn't that he didn't want to pay the price, because again, as I said last time, Biden has proven, actually, experimentally, with his own behavior, that he's willing to pay a political price when he decides that there are important strategic interests, like he did in Afghanistan. Okay, so it was a decision that, well, we don't have a strategic interest in releasing Iran out of the doghouse. Now, Iran, to begin with, went to the nuclear program because it wants a stick that it can use to get the US to regularize its situation. That's why it was willing to negotiate such a deal to begin with, because it's looking for a stick.
I think both you and Joseph, even though you presented to Joseph as you disagree, I agree with Hassan. It sounds like you guys both said the same thing twice. You both agreed and said more context to the same point, which makes sense to me, because my notes before we started this podcast were simply post Iran revolution. Iran came out the box as a sectarian religious state. That was their thing. They used Shiaism to advance their agenda and create tentacles and to extend their reach, because they realized that the US is pigeonholing them into a situation where you need a boogeyman so you can go to the Gulf states and sell weapons to them, go to Israel and funnel weapons to them. And it's very profitable politically and economically to have this boogeyman. And Iran recognizes that. So they said, fine, I'm not only going to be the boogeyman that you're pigeonholing me to, but I'm going to be the best boogeyman. And in doing so, I'm going to extend my reach through my proxies and strengthen them and create sticks. That way I can negotiate these sticks later. In other words, if you guys want me to downplay, renegotiate the nuclear program, well, it makes more sense that it's up and running and then I can downplay it. So is that what you're saying? Makes sense.
Yes. I just add that actually when Iran expanded its political influence into Iraq, it was because the US found this useful in creating its Iraqi colony. Now, that doesn't mean that the US gave Iran a gift. It means that Iran offered services that the US was in need for, and they paid for services rendered.
I don't know if I agree with that, actually. I think we will disagree on this one. I think that the United States genuinely made a profoundly foolish, unthought out decision when they removed Saddam Hussein, not realizing what would come next. I do believe that this was a strategic disaster, that they once the ball got rolling, they couldn't bring it back in, and they had no choice but to accept that Iran would basically colonize Iraqi politics. I don't think this was a strategic
I disagree
goal.
on this.
I think that this was a big mistake, and to this day they haven't figured out. It was an example of the total incompetence of the neocons in the Bush administration.
First, let me make a disclaimer. The fact that the US is an empire doesn't make it omnipotent or omnipresent. So it makes mistakes, makes stupid mistakes. I don't debate that. However, they knew exactly where they were going. Wolfowitz knew exactly whom he was dealing with. Wolfowitz actually sought Iran guys in Detroit, and in London and in the Washington, D.C. He saw them. Last week, there was an event that will explain to you exactly what's going on. One of those drones hit an Israeli encampment, military encampment in Golan Heights, and killed 2 Israeli soldiers. The militia in Iraq came out denying the responsibility of al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya في Iraq, that is Iran's guys in Iraq, for that event. That was the only incident in which that outfit had killed anyone in Israel. Because these guys who at night launch drones at Israel, in the morning get paid by the Iraqi government out of the Iraqi budget that is sponsored by the US. Now, why would the US do this? Actually, it has a colony now in the region. The US spent all of its colonial history in the Middle East since 1950s trying to create a role in the Middle East as the peace negotiator. Past 2001, it doesn't need to do that. The US is an integral part of the region because it has a colony in the region.
So you would say then that actually this is not only in Iran, but I would say Iran and both Saudi use sectarian as a tool to, and which is very dangerous to our ummah, to divide the ummah. And,
but that is not a question of ummah. So when the British created the nation state in Iraq on Sunni sectarian dominance, they were using a tool. You don't care about Islamic sectarian, it's just a tool. Okay. When the US recreated the nation state in Iraq on the dominance of the Shi'i sect, this is not a stable structure. When you do that, that's not a stable structure. The British created with the Sunni sectarian dominance because they knew that this was a stable structure. The way Iraq exists in this region would make it a stable structure if it was dominated by a hidden Sunni sect, but not the other way around. The British got this. So that's why they picked up a Hashemite to put as a head of the state and created that dominance. The US also understand the same logic. It's not that they don't. Wolfwood got what he was doing. And when the Shia sect that he gave the power in Iraq went after all of the Sunni sectarians and killed them, he was sponsoring that. It was happening with his sponsorship and budget. That was going on all 2003, 2005, and he was fine with that. Even though I'll grant Joseph that actually had a very bad result for the US because it meant that they could not create a structure that can even look like a serious state. And it was too unstable. I'll grant you that.
Which brings up Hassan's point again. You're both describing Iran, and not to bring up Saudi Arabia, but they're the other side of the coin, are using sectarianism to distract us and to advance their own nation state agendas. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I don't think either of us think that Iran is liberating and saving Gaza, and we all know Saudi Arabia certainly isn't.
No.
And I think, once again, this is the rules of nation state. It's a shame. I mean, this shows how powerful the nation state is, and the Ummah cannot unite, and so far has not shown the ability to contest and challenge the logic of the nation state, which is obviously very toxic towards Muslim interests.
This video gonna provoke. There's some Muslims, again, back to the sectarian problem, that will look at what we're saying as wrong because Iran is despite their flaws, despite X, Y, Z, the other thing you guys mentioned, they might even agree with everything because so far all you guys presented was just facts, political facts that have happened, and you're putting everything quote unquote in context. But they would argue, the critics will argue, well, they're the only ones doing something.
True.
There's two ends of the spectrum. They'll say that.
True. Why do you want to debate that? It's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
and the other spectrum is that we like the sensitivity. Look what they did to the Muslims in Syria. How can you even say that they're doing something for the Muslims?
Well,
there's one part of it.
Well, look. What we're trying to do is to understand realities as they are.
Yeah.
So Iran is attacking Israel. That's a fact. As Joseph points out, it had demonstrated that it can actually cause serious damage and it's choosing not to do so. And it's doing this to tell the Israelis that there are limits and you have to maintain them. In the end, Iran wants to be part of the international order. And it knows that it has to stay within limits. If it has any hope to be accepted by the international order. The point is, trying to make positions to satisfy end goals is wrong. We understand things as they are, not to satisfy emotions. So
Yes.
because you hate Iran, I'm not going to tell you, no, it's not attacking Israel. It's attacking Israel. That's a fact. Because you love Iran, I'm not going to tell you, well, it's attacking Israel because it sees it as an enemy. No, it doesn't see it as an enemy. It sees it as a rival. And that's why it wants to coexist with it. I'll tell you that the US has already put limits to what Israel will do. Israel is going to attack in a vicious way. It's going to attack military posts and industrial posts. It might attack electricity supplies. Iran will deny that these attacks killed anyone and keep going on. But it will not attack serious oil installations, and it will not attack the nuclear system, and Iran will consider this to be a draw. And everybody keeps going on. Now, that means Iran has been weakened, but to fight another fight. Okay.
Anything else, man, gentlemen?
No, thank
I
you.
think this was great. Thank you very much. Really good.
All right.
Good. Okay.
We'll talk,
Salam alaikum.
All right.